I think we're just about ready to get started here. So we really appreciate those of you who dialed in today, or those of you who are taking time to watch us on demand. We're going to go through some of our best practices here for how to use view-through attribution and incrementality in mastering your TV campaign. So let's go to some quick introductions. So my name is Greg. I'm a senior client services manager here at Tatari. I've been here for about 2 years, and throughout that time, I've worked hand in hand with the Roman brand to help grow their TV campaign. So with that, I'll toss it over to Karina.
Thanks, Greg. So hi, everyone. Karina Rum. I'm the offline media manager for one of our digital health clinics, Roman, covering TV inclusive of streaming in addition to out-of-home and direct mail campaigns.
And hi, I'm Mike Swinson, head of data science here at Tatari. I'm really excited to talk to you today about data-driven measurement. Kind of been lucky that at Tatari I can focus on what I'm passionate about, which is leveraging my background in neural networks, statistics, and economics to build out analytical tools that let the data do the heavy lifting, freeing up time for others to focus on the creative aspects of marketing.
Great. So today we want to dive into 4 main sections. So first we'll ask Karina to tell us a little bit more about Roman and the Roman brand specifically, followed by a breakdown of some of our popular attribution methods, view-through versus incrementality. Then we'll dive deeper into incremental measurement for TV advertising, along with some of the best practices of what to use and when. Please ask questions throughout by entering them into the webinar console, and then we'll answer them at the end of the session. So let's start by explaining what Tatari is. Tatari is a data analytics company focused on buying and measuring ads across linear and streaming TV. In this case, linear would be, think an NFL football game or HGTV Prime, whereas streaming video would be streaming to individual users such as Hulu or Pluto TV. Tatari is built on data analytics, and we help brands build media plans and deliver campaigns to reach audiences across both linear and streaming TV by leveraging the data and analytics. We also give marketers the ability to measure and optimize those campaigns, just like they would really with any digital campaign. It's all transparent, accurate, and in near real time through our dashboard. So these are just a few of the brands we've brought to TV. We work with some of the largest direct-to-consumer brands, as well as some smaller disruptor brands. Some of these brands are new to TV, whereas others are well-established legacy brands aiming to reach new audiences at a very large scale. So one of those clients that we've been lucky enough to take through the entire journey is here today, and that's Roman. So I'll hand it over to you, Corona, to introduce Ro and the brands.
Thanks, Greg. So I know most people will have likely heard of Roman, but our parent company is Ro, which is a patient-driven telehealth company that aims to be a patient's first call for all of their healthcare needs. Using technology, Ro empowers physicians to provide high-quality, affordable care when and where patients need it most. We've also recently launched Ro's Pharmacy, a simple and affordable online pharmacy where every medication is $5 per month. Ro treats patients nationwide and has powered over 4 million digital healthcare visits. Ro powers 3 digital health clinics: Roy for Women's Health, Zero for Fighting Addiction with a focus on smoking cessation, and Roman for Men's Health. We'll be focusing on Roman using view-through versus incrementality and our approach to TV advertising. So let's start with how Roman's marketing strategy has grown since our launch in October 2017. We started out with digital marketing, as most direct-to-consumer brands do, with a focus on search and Facebook. As we sought to continue to increase brand awareness of our offerings, we've looked to TV as a new channel to add to the mix in August 2018, so about a year later. We initially started out with cable networks and then began to lean into sports given our male target, with a focus on baseball that led to our bigger partnership with MLB in 2019. At this point, we have an always-on strategy with linear that we focus a lot of our dollars on live sports content, as well as opportunistic buys where we can secure last-minute deals given its consistent scale while maintaining a core mix of cable networks. We find it's important for us to have a turnkey strategy that is always adaptable to the current landscape. As we've continued to scale our linear TV presence, we've also incorporated streaming into our mix. We see streaming as an extension of our linear mix that we can typically get in front of an incremental audience. Giving streaming's higher pricing point, we use it in certain circumstances, like when we see any increases in linear pricing, which typically happens in Q2 and Q4. We also think of pushing more towards streaming when linear viewership is reduced, more fragmented, like around summer months. And then also when a network is seeing consistent performance on TV, we like to complement it with the streaming counterpart. So for instance, if we're seeing strong performance from CNN, we'll look to add CNN Go on the streaming side. And lastly, we use streaming when we feel we've hit a bit of creative fatigue across the mix, especially for smaller nets that see a lot of frequency, so we can target a new incremental audience. I'll hand it back over to Greg, who's going to explain the 2 ways we measure ad response in TV advertising.
Thanks, Karina. So imagine this is your website traffic, and each person exposed to your brand comes from different marketing sources. View-through is going to take credit for everyone who's exposed to a TV ad at least once within a window of time, whatever time period that is that you're looking at. Whereas incrementality only takes credit for users who were truly influenced by the TV ad and then responded to your brand. The way we do this is through data science methodology that utilizes a proprietary control group, which includes responders who would have come to the site anyways, regardless of whether or not they were exposed to your TV ad. We then subtract that view-through to give you the true incremental lift from TV. There are a few different use cases for looking at view-through versus incrementality, and we'll get into more of this later. On both linear and streaming TV, we provide incrementality as it's generally a more precise measurement of the true ad response from TV. So next, let's cover how we measure incrementality on both linear and streaming TV with Mike, our Chief Data Science Officer.
Thanks, Greg. For linear TV as an offline channel, it's historically been hard to measure ad response. At Tatari, we measure linear incrementality by looking at traffic lift over a dynamically updating baseline. We focus on immediate responders, so those who respond immediately after an ad view, and then scale that immediate lift up by a drag factor to capture the total lift from each spot. Now, the specifics behind the dynamic baseline computations are a bit complex, but effectively, it's adapting to the client's traffic throughout the day to isolate what the traffic would have been in the absence of a specific TV spot. Then a custom drag factor is identified deterministically through IP matching on smart TV data, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to identify the proportion of incremental TV traffic responding to the specific ad. We also track deep funnel conversions as part of this process by applying a pixel to the client website and then track user behavior from visit to sales. Now, while historically it's been difficult to get a reliable full accounting of results down to the sale level without an expensive test control geo experiment, we find that our results are robust, consistently providing results comparable to that which you derive from a true test control methodology. Now, I mentioned that geo tests are expensive, and that's mainly because the CPMs on a local level are often multiples of those achievable on a national basis. So to truly compare and measure, you need to scale the results by the ratio of those impression level costs. As an example of this, we worked through with some of our clients to conduct some of these geographic experiments and see how they compare with our dynamic baseline measurement. The most recent of which, we ran a test with one of our retail clients. This test, we set up a test group focused on 3 metro areas where we had linear TV ads run, and then isolated a comparable control group. The test market consisted of 3 DMAs, those you see here in green: Denver, Austin, and Raleigh. This choice was in part made based on their strong correlation with overall national sales, as well as their geographic dispersion. The same was done for the control market. You can see some of these control cities now displayed in blue on the map above. The experiment ran over the course of 8 consecutive weeks with an identical media buy in each test market. After scaling by the ratio of national to local CPMs in these markets, we found a very strong alignment of our baseline lift approach with the geo test measurement. Now, testing experiments are always good, but they can be expensive. They can be expensive either because those local CPMs are just much more expensive, or from the standpoint of the opportunity costs necessary to pause a national campaign. So you might not necessarily have the luxury of time or cost to be able to engage in these tests, but you can have confidence that our incrementality metrics provide accurate results. Outside of the tests that we run internally at Tatari, our clients often find that their methods of comparison show similar results as well. So let's now turn to Karina to see an example of this in practice.
Yes, so with Roman, we launched TV with a national campaign as our baseline was low enough that it would be easy to see the incremental impact. We have been able to see this not only through dynamic baseline via the Tatari dash, but have also seen the halo effect on other channels like search, which has reinforced our confidence around TV's impact. As an example, here's a spike from our World Series Game 7 spot this past season. You can see there is an incredible lift through the Tatari dash, which is the chart on the left, but we also saw a correlated uptick in our branded search that we attribute to TV, which is the chart on the right. I'll now hand it back over to Mike to explain more on Tatari's method for providing us accurate measurements on streaming TV.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, she's absolutely right. We also apply the same rigor in our methods to measure streaming performance. So with all of our streaming platform partners, we receive impressions data for IP level tracking. This is then used to isolate those users who've seen the client's ad and taken an action, either on the client's website or app. Now, this may seem straightforward, but it's actually, again, a bit more complicated than it seems. There are a number of issues with IP tracking. So, for example, ISPs or even self-service providers, they'll oftentimes use the same IP for multiple users. So our method takes great pains to filter out any IP address for which we don't have confidence in a true one-to-one household relationship. We then use a tightly linked device graph to isolate performance by unique user. Now with this, we're able to measure view-through response. Then we refine our measurements further by honing in on those truly incremental responders, by constructing a simulated control group and subtracting out its distribution from the view-through measurement. Now this process is a bit complicated, but the basic idea is that we want to remove from our measurement any response that would have occurred anyway without the TV ad. This then results in the graph that you see above. From this, what you'll see is the streaming ad response measured on the y-axis versus the time since ad view on the x-axis. An initial spike in response occurs immediately following the view of an ad. The view-through response then continues to rise over time since the ad was viewed, but the incremental response will asymptotically converge to a final total incremental response. Now, as we did with linear, we conducted a similar experiment to compare our computation of performance results with true test control. For the test control approach, we first randomly split the population into two groups. One was a test group that served streaming ads, and the second, basically the control group had no client ads whatsoever. So we're then able to track those results on the two populations. Now note, if you want to run this type of test, you often need to pay for ads in both of those groups. One way you can do this is to serve a PSA or a public service announcement ad on the control population. That makes no mention of your client's product or site. Then the tracking can be easily accomplished through the platform's measurement tools, and then you can compare those two group performance. The results that we found, again, very much align between the two methodologies, even though the Tatari method really only used half the data to make the measurement that the test control approach did, because we weren't allowed to look at the control population. So essentially our simulated control had to be constructed from the test population alone. Now, in addition to our incrementality measurements for streaming, we also provide a wide selection of view-through performance measurements to choose from. Both incremental and view-through can be accessed from our dashboard depending on your measurement needs. Now, Karina will show us how to access these from our dashboard.
So you'll see here, we have the ability to select what type of measurement you want to view. You can look at incremental or view through with a 1, 7, or 28-day attribution window. It's helpful for us to have both the view through as well as the incremental to toggle between, depending on our overall objectives. Hopefully you better understand how we measure results on linear and streaming. And now let's take a look at when we should use view through or incremental, depending on whether you're advertising on linear or streaming. So when it comes to our linear media, we first take a look at CPV, conversion rate, and CPA performance to understand which networks are the most efficient and which are weak, looking at least the past 2 to 4 weeks. From there, we look to remove our weakest areas and optimize for efficiency, taking a look at day part, day of week, creative, latest CPMs, etc. Once optimized, it's important to let those changes take effect for at least 2 weeks so we can get a strong enough read on impact. Of course, if something is completely outside of our goal range, we won't wait and we'll remove those areas immediately. But our optimization strategy can change depending on that particular month's overall goals and strategy. Regardless, it's great to have the flexibility to toggle between all of these potential variables when it comes to performance, and something we do regularly. I'll turn it over to Greg to discuss comparisons between digital ad response and view through.
Thanks, Karina. So on the streaming side, view through is helpful when you're comparing results across other digital advertising channels, because this gives you the apples to apples comparison, as most other channels use view through attribution. You think like Facebook, which sort of coined the view through attribution. So it's a really helpful way to do that sort of apples to apples comparison. And then related to this, user attribution reports exported to multi-touch attribution vendors are typically generated on a view through basis. So Karina will now share how else they think about measurement on streaming.
So with view through, it's important for us to think about our typical patient journey and figure out where streaming fits in. Of course, creative will play a factor in this depending on the messaging, but we typically only look at one-day view through to capture everyone who's already considering converting, whether they've interacted with another ad or not. The further we expand the attribution window, then the more prospective patients we get who started out at the top of the funnel, as this illustration is pointing out. In addition to looking at your customer journey to determine performance attribution, you can use incremental measurement to understand what platform is driving the most unique conversions to help trim potential waste. But it's good to have view through to compare with digital CPAs, as Greg spoke to earlier. It's also important to think about frequency and how that affects overall response in addition to device breakout. You want to make sure you're not wasting impressions for people who have already converted with the same messaging. Lastly, we're able to find incremental audiences by taking advantage of streaming targeting capabilities. For instance, we ran a Hulu campaign against two targets, one being male 25 plus and one being males 35 plus. We've seen over time that the male 35 plus campaign has stronger efficiencies compared to the men 25 plus for both view through and incremental, alluding to this being a more untapped audience as well as a more responsive one. Now that we've gone through how we use view through and incrementality across TV and streaming, let's take a look at how they work together to drive reach and frequency. You can see here we've reached a large audience on linear, as we've mostly focused our dollars on linear advertising. But like I've mentioned at the beginning, we've been able to reach incremental audiences on streaming, and you can see there's a small overlap in our reach, meaning not only can you find incremental audiences, but also new ones you may not be reaching on linear TV. You can see here that 64% of streaming's reach is a completely new audience, so there is value in having it account for a portion of your overall TV mix. I'll hand it back to Greg to summarize key points from today.
Thank you, Karina. So what do we learn? Number one, view through is useful when comparing results across other channels, Facebook being one of the examples there. Incrementality is helpful to see performance and make optimizations intra-campaign. So as Karina pointed out, which creative is working the best, which platform is working the best. Number three, both view through and incrementality are useful together depending on your campaign goals. So she was alluding how they turn one up or down, as they move quarter to quarter. And then number four, advertise on both linear and streaming TV to really tap into that entire TV audience universe. So next, we're going to go over to the Q&A. And it looks like our first question is related to if you only run on linear TV, what's the best way to get started on streaming? So what I would say to that is you can really begin by leveraging your linear TV results. You understand which networks work the best and which demographics have driven the most efficient response. And so we can target platforms that are most likely to align with those learnings. And then on top of that, I would just say to start broad, take a broad testing approach. And then once we start to understand who is responding, we can drill down further and further with different targeting tactics. Okay, and it looks like there are a few more questions coming in too. So Karina, I'm gonna let you take the next one here.
Yeah, so great, we just had another question come in. It looks like this one's for Roman. So what's next for Roman and TV advertising? We're now just about, so for us, we're about 2 years into advertising on TV. So we're beginning to start to have strong data year over year against all of our sports programming that we're able to analyze and optimize as we continue to scale. We'll also look to continue testing as our product offering continues to grow and we diversify our messaging. And we'll also want to increase our presence through streaming, giving its consistent growth and unique audiences.
Great, thanks, Karina. Yeah, I think I'll take the next few questions from here. This is Mike. We have one question asking what percentage of Tatari's business is linear versus streaming? Well, we've really seen a big growth in streaming business over the past several months. Right now, it's still a small portion of the business. It's about 10 to 15%, but that's continually growing month after month. Let's see, next question, how do you attribute search conversions to TV? Well, for linear measurement, we filter down our results first to only those channels that are likely to drive a TV response. So that's primarily search and direct traffic. From there, we'll leverage our baseline lift methodology, which will find only those truly incremental responders. So it will subtract out those search responders who would have come anyway, regardless of the TV ads. Next question, do you use a vanity URL or promo code to help with tracking? Some clients do have vanity URLs. Generally, what we find though is that that's only really a supplement to our tracking approaches, because oftentimes some people won't use the vanity URL. It may be too complicated. They just go directly through to the client's homepage. Or if there's some sort of promo code, it can potentially overcount those results, because people find these things on those coupon sites. They may not necessarily have seen the TV ad. So we'll leverage these as kind of directional help, but we primarily are relying on our other forms of measurement. So that being the baseline lift approach, as well as the closed loop methodology to track that direct performance. Let's see, okay, I guess the next question was, you see better results on linear or streaming? I think that really depends on the client. For some clients, what we find is that streaming works better, probably more dependent on their product and their target audience. Other clients, we find linear works better. So it's really a mix depending on what your product is or your target market. Next question we have, does Tatari help with creative optimization? Now, that's a very good question. So yeah, as you may know, Tatari is we're not a creative agency, so we're not designing those creatives. You'll go through a separate agency to work on that. But yes, we do help with creative optimizations. One of the benefits we have in being a measurement technology is that we can have that full feedback loop to see what actually works best. So we not only track your current creatives and tell you which ones are working better, holding constant for distribution of spend across different networks, but we also have a few other things that we've been looking at. One of the projects that someone on my team has been looking into recently is basically building out kind of an AI algorithm that's isolating different features of creatives. So isolating different features to find out which features are those creatives. So that could include things like, do you have the client's website name listed the whole time on the ad, or how do voiceovers perform, or if you're looking at a specific segment, for a particular segment of audience, do male actors outperform female actors, right? So different features of those creatives to try to isolate which of those features tend to generally work better than others. So it's an ongoing process of collecting that data and running that through our algorithms, but we've seen some interesting results already, and we're looking forward to pulling that up to a larger scale to find additional interesting results. Let's see. It looks like we have time for one last question here. Looks like someone was asking about what is the ideal mix between linear and streaming advertising? Well, usually what we'll do is we start the client off with one and then start bringing on the other. So we monitor the reach of their ads each week, making sure they're hitting their target KPIs and adjusting as needed to make sure they hit their goals. So basically they'll work directly with the CSMs and media buyers to determine what that best approach is for the business. I think, yeah, let's see. Yeah, so any other questions, you can put them in. Looks like we have time. Actually, we have another one that's just come through. How do you factor in how did you hear about us survey responses? We notice, that we have our own individual survey responses, and we get different results necessarily when we look at the overall performance. So yeah, the survey responses are something that the client has separate access to, and so we definitely like to leverage that to understand what what those performance results are providing. One of the things that we found though with surveys is that surveys can sometimes provide inaccurate results. So you have to be careful in how you design that survey. So one, certainly you want to make sure if you have a drop-down list of potential places that someone could have heard from it, you want to make sure you're mixing up the order of that. Other things that we found from survey results, one interesting, I think, thing that I found recently with one client, they had a very detailed survey. So they had a kind of a free-form section where people would list out even the program and the network that they heard about the ad from if they selected TV. And what we found was that we knew that the results were not quite right because there were networks and programs that were listed that there were no TV ads that were aired for those networks ever. So what was generally tending to happen when I looked at the results is that the survey results tended to overinflate the performance of certain types of networks and programming. So for example, people tended to put down more frequently than what we would find in our algorithms. They would say that they heard about the ad from a news source or some educational TV program. And so we saw that the survey results had better results in those cases than what we were finding. And then on the flip side, we found for programming that was more entertainment TV, we'll say, right? So reality shows, the Kardashians or some of these other shows, they tended to have very low reporting on performance there, whereas we saw, much higher reporting of those results. So I'd say to take surveys with a grain of salt because there's a couple of biases going on there. One, people can't oftentimes remember what they've actually seen for the ads, but then secondarily, they might not necessarily be truthful all the time, right? We had a lot of people who maybe because of their, they wanted to specify certain programming, right? This client had not aired on Fox News or aired on some other news programs, or in CNBC, and they wanted to specify CNBC, and others wanted to specify Fox News. So I think you just have to be very careful with that. Let's see. Other questions coming through? Yeah, so we also have a question here on when you look at the view-through CPA comparisons for digital, as a result, comparing to other channels, how do you account for the fact that each channel captures conversions differently or works differently? So some are more top of funnel with longer conversion windows, and others are more bottom of funnel. So when we're looking at our measurement results, what we have is basically when we look at, we have both incremental and view through. So on the incremental side and the view through side, we're basically tracking the time at which someone has come into the site, and then we're tracking conversions from that point. So we're going through and isolating what conversions can be tied to those users who came in during a TV window. So on the incremental side, you're looking at those users who came in within a 5-minute window, tagging them, and then seeing what conversions came as a result of that. We're then further going through and subtracting out the percentage of those conversions that would have come anyway. So for example, if there was, on the incremental side, if you had a minutely cohort where you had 50% of the traffic that came through that was tagged as TV and 50% that was baseline, any conversions that we attribute to users coming through in that minute would only be assigned a 0.5 for those conversions. Now on the view through side, because we're using kind of an industry standard view through methodology, that that CPA measurement is done a little bit differently. We're just tracking total conversions that come through for a particular period of time. All right, so I think that looks like that is our last question. So that wraps up our Q&A. If we didn't get to your question today, we'll make sure to follow up with you. So thanks so much, everyone, for attending.
Great. Thanks, everybody.